Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us on the North American Knowledge Team meeting. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon.
Gosh, I was giving you a nice introduction, Alex, with my mic closed.
It was probably an improvement.
Okay. I was thanking you for not giving up on us, and I was saying this is almost like a round robin in a way. You're here to elevate us through your teachings. We take that elevation and then elevate others, and then and it all circles back to you, and so on and so forth. So we want to thank you, give you much accolades, and thank you for being with us, continuing to represent the technology, and again, so that we can become more enlightened through your work. So we want to thank you very much for being here and your dedication to the science and bringing the change to this planet. Thank you very much, Alex.
And thank you very much. So what makes this meeting so powerful is not just the hosts here, but it's the panelists. You keep coming and hungry for more information, and not just more information, but understanding better how to present that information, because we have a big mountain to climb. We have a lot of teaching to do, mainly because we have a lot of knowledge to gain, and also because we have a lot of people to teach. And so how do we condense over 6,000 hours into a few minutes? And this challenge is becoming more and more difficult every week because the knowledge keeps going forward. But we have the technology, and we just need to use that technology. And so we're all part of the process. So we have to understand that Mr. Marantau Kalikesh has brought to us a huge gift. Under the banner of the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute. And as such, this is a teaching on plasma science. We're at the intermediate inner space level. We're talking about the emotion of position. My name is Alexander, and I am from Canada. It is January 29th, 2023. This is the Kesh Foundation North American Plasma Education Series. So I want to make sure that welcome all of the knowledge seekers from all the other continents, because you are what makes this meeting so powerful. And it follows up another powerful group on Friday nights, which is the Brazilian teachings. And then, of course, it follows up on the main teachings on Thursday, which we have gone over 9 years on that teaching alone. So in terms of understanding inner space, if we remember what we covered on the basic inner space, and so somehow it's this nebulous space that is somewhere. And so as we're getting into this intermediate inner space, we see that it's an extension of all the other teachings, understanding, knowing, insight, and earth space. And we can be as complex, as detailed as we wish to be, or we can streamline it all. And one of the things that is assisting us in the streamlining of it all is understanding our emotional position, which is the third in this series, which we started with the Three Amigos adaptation. And now we're looking at the emotional position. And it's not the first time that we've looked at emotion. It's been a long time in between, because we've had a lot of difficulty understanding the difference between the physicality and the soul level. And so when we look at the links, we look at it as our search for outer space. And we find that when we are in outer space, it's just that little tiny little red dot in the bottom right-hand corner, which is our universe and our part of the universe. It's our sentimental little pie in the sky. And we see that it's not really a pie, it's a crumb. But this crumb is also very important, because when we see and measure strength and size, it's irrelevant, because in book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matters, we have the culmination of 3 different energy states: matter state, dark matter, antimatter. That creates one field as a source. And then we look at our souls and how we derived our souls, which is all part of the origin of the universe. And then we see that there's a link between that source and our soul. And so in book number 2, The Structure of the Light, explains this, how we can transport ourselves and decide which way to transport ourselves, where to transport ourselves, and then, of course, what dimension. And so all of these questions come about because we're trying to understand our man space. And so we find within our man space that we have soul space, emotional space, and physical space. And somehow we're able to transcend all of these levels. And do we transcend them all at once? And then, of course, we really have to take into account Earth space, because that was our target. And not just any place on the target. We needed to hit the bullseye. And the bullseye is somewhere between the moon space magnetical boundary and the gravitational core of the Earth. And so our target was the biosphere range, but that biosphere range encapsulates the entire Earth. And so where in that biosphere range was your target? And so lo and behold, you are where you are. And why you're there? Well, there are reasons. Because you see, this all comes about because of plasma energy. So when people ask you about plasma, explain to them that plasma is a kind of energy state. And there are different kinds of energy state. And there are differences in those energy states with respect to their impact. But we need to understand that there is an earth space energy state, and there's our inner space, and there's an outer space. And as we understand all these things, then we see what is important in our life. And really, this is the most important thing in our life, because it's our life. And if our life is not important, then really nothing is important, is it? And this is the thing that we have to understand, because we have various emotional tuggings. And so we discussed in the past, and it's been quite a while since we got back to this. So we all understand that we have emotions, but there's an emotion of physicality, and many of us reference only that. But we see that the physicality is a part of the emotion of presence. And so although the physicality has an emotion, the presence of that physicality also has an emotion. How did we get there? And so today we're going to discuss the emotion of position. It also follows the plasma rules. So let's make sure that for the newcomers here, that we understand that these rules, because there are different energy states and they can increase or decrease. And they increase or decrease by transfer rates. And so these transfer rates change by many orders of magnitude the higher we go. And the increase or decrease in the energy states also increase by orders of magnitude. So the realization here is that as we can change our position, not only by changing our state, but changing our transfer rate. And all of this is done through the rules of a higher energy state feeding the lower energy state. And so in simple terms, if we say that these changes in these energy states are part of natural creation or natural decay, but there's another transfer state, and that is the catalytic transfer state, which is non-consuming. So does that mean that the natural creation or natural decay is consuming? Does that mean the catalytic transfer state is inert? And so we understand that plasma absorbs fields, and that plasma is also a barrier of fields. And so how can it be both? And how it can be both is because it's bound to the ethos of the universe. And so if we don't understand that, we're just looking at it from our own man space. But if you look at it from the universe space point of view, you'll find that the universe is very well organized. And in fact, it welcomes us. So it only stands to reason that we should welcome the universe as well, because we are part of the universe. And so whatever part of that universe is dependent on a field where we reside in. And so we see that that field manifests itself from rotation. And it is the speed of the rotation in which it affects the field strength. So what is the relationship of this field strength? Well, it depends on the other fields. And so there are field relations. And as a result of these relations, there's a strength accommodation. And are you only accommodating your neighbor? Or does it take into your account the neighbor and the neighbor's neighbor? And how much do you take into account? And how much do you discount, right? And so this not only becomes a point of understanding, but it also becomes a point of conflict, possibly. And so we're trying to organize ourselves on this earth space, and then we see, well, earth space is a kind of energy state as well. And so we see that the plasma is bound to the ethos of the universe. Okay, well, so where does man space fit into this whole thing? So when we look at the relationships, we see that in terms of plasma dimensions, 1 and 1 is more than 2. This is the new math, because we see the 1 and the 1 is the feeding dimensions, and the 2, the greater than 2, is the feedback dimension. And the reason it's more than 2 is because you still have the feeding dimensions. So it's the feeding dimensions plus the feedback dimension, which gives you our 3D dimension. And as observers, or fudgers, whichever you want to choose, so that we can be very selective in what we want to take into account. Clearly, as observers, we're not part of any of these three dimensions. We're in another dimension. So we could call that the fourth dimension. But it's not the first three dimensions. That's the point. So the reality dimension is that outer space is not a place, because there's no place to go to in outer space. Outer space is really a method of energy transfer. And since energy is always in motion, we have to have a field to transfer that energy to. So when we look at the creation of the universe, we understand that it exists for energy. And because this energy is always in motion, it's always positive. But the motion is the charge. And so by applying a charge to that motion, we understand if it's positive or negative. But if it's positive or negative, then how do you know that if you don't know who your neighbor is? And so you find that all things are in combination, because it's not just with your neighbor, but it's with your neighbor's neighbor. And then by those same rules, when we look at the cover of book number 1, we see that, well, these three fields come together into the creation of matter, which is a matter field. And each of these three energies, matter, dark matter, and antimatter, have a field strength, an energy level. And these energy levels are different by an order of magnitude. And so they'd come together as one field. Well, how can three different energy levels come together as one field? Well, there's your three dimensions. That's one field. Then there's another field. Those are another three dimensions. Are they the same dimensions as the first field? Well, not necessarily. And seeing as you're seeing one field, and as seeing as you're seeing another field, then clearly you're not either of those two fields. And seeing as those two fields create a third field, and seeing as you're seeing that, you're not part of that field either. So you're none of those three dimensions. And you could pick whichever of those three dimensions you wish to pick, and you're none of those three dimensions of any of those three fields. So who are you? And how do you navigate? Because you have to navigate around all of these things. And so you are the last man standing, and as a result, you have the responsibility to turn on and turn off the feeding of these energies. And you can change the strength of these fields by increasing or decreasing the strength of these fields. And as a result, you change your positioning. And so you could say that you're enhancing or diminishing your position, and that is only a reference to the energy level. But within that level, you can also change your positioning. So there's no rule that says you have to change your level to change your positioning. And there's no rule that says the enhancement of that position is a superior, or a diminishment of your positioning is inferior. We're just talking about positioning. It has nothing to do with hierarchy. And so we see that when two forces come together, the purpose of that is to harvest the energy of the universe through self-enhancement. And so we didn't say which two forces. Neither did we say only two forces. It's just two forces coming together, and more forces could join in as well. And as they keep coming in, they create this third dimension. And as I say, this is part of the self-enhancement process. But too many of us think that the self-enhancement comes by consuming others and stealing from others. And the worst kind of this stealing is when we start to steal the essential energy, the life-giving energy, what we call loose harvesting. And as every kind of theft, it actually contributes to self-consumption, because that theft now becomes, the product of that theft becomes your baggage. And so now you have more. And that becomes your manifestation point, you and your baggage. Is it profit? Or is it garbage? And how does that compare to what your neighbors are doing? And which neighbors are we referring to? So we find that there's a plasmatic symbiosis within the fields. And then we find that there are also rays. And not only do they travel between the fields, but they travel between the dimensions. And so, for instance, we have X-rays and gamma rays, and we should have cosmic rays. And so when we look at the universe, we see that there are many, many broadcast channels. But the broadcast channel that we've dialed into is our Earth. And as such, we are a community. And as such, we are exposed to some transmission defects. And as we see, because of the broadcast, it affects us emotionally. And so these transmission defects are actually emotional defects. And so this is our inner space radio. And so the question becomes, what channel are you tuning into? Well, the most important channel, of course, is to understand the planet's positioning, because when you look at the sun space channels, you find that each planet has tuned into its own channel. That channel happens to be its orbit. And so when we were looking to come to Earth space, because we were pretty fussy about that, so we were tuned into the Earth space channel. And as we tuned into that channel, then we created our own broadcast channel. So that took care of the planet positioning. But where's this connection? You know, where are we going to decide the dimension? And what dimensions? Well, what are dimensions? And so we have this confusion. And so we've seen with the three amigos that really these dimensions are fundamentally plasmatic. So depending on the dimension that you operate in demands an adaptation. And that adaptation comes from various emotions, which is to say this dimension versus that dimension, which is to say this plasmatic field versus this physical field. And there are connections. So we find that really man space, what we call as our physical body, is representative of the emotion of presence. Our physical body is a presence, but it's there because of the emotion of presence. And so we understand that our soul of the man has a brain, which is physical, and our brain has emotions. And then we look at our body, and it's loaded with GANs. And we know that GANs has a an emotional affinity. Water has an emotional affinity also. And so these are all plasma emotions. And we can give these emotions. And when we give them, let's say we give an idea. So if I give you an idea, does that mean that I have a hole in my head? Because now I've given a part of me. Or is that a contribution added to? And that also goes for the wish. What about courage? Do you have a hole in your heart when you display courage? Or love? What happens when you give love? So we find that the core component here are these maggrav fields, and where we see the fundamental particle, the electron, which is really a PM tick, because it's a combination of matter, dark matter, and antimatter. But the electron is also part of the atomic structure, which is a marriage between electron and proton. This is a marriage. There's a balance. How can the tiny atom balance the big fat proton? And yet, this is the structure of the ray. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about plasmatic dimensions? Or are we talking about physical dimensions? Or are we talking about systems of energy transfer? And so we frequently make the wrong choice, because we're not only used to stealing, but we're also used to getting robbed and deceived and double-crossed. And so we find that the energy binding systems, which we need so desperately, and this is only natural, but we take it from the easiest point by stealing it from others. But since the others are all part of your community, you really end up stealing from yourself. And so this is one of the problems that we have, because we only see that what we have is all there is. But there's more. And we need to transcend these limitations of understanding more. And what are these limitations? Well, they're limited by the understanding of nuclear science, because the whole business of nuclear science has to do with the speed of light. And so the speed of light is constant. The speed of light as we know it as a physicality. But when we look at the ethos of the universe, that involves morality, compassion, and courage. And so these are all part of creation. And so that creation had to create the light. So just like you, as the observer of your dimensions, you're none of those dimensions. So the creator is not part of the physical creation of this light, because it's from this light that we created the earth space. And this earth space had to be created prior to the man space, only because we decided to come here. So it's man space living on earth space. So if man space was here, there would be no here. The here is the earth space. And so whether it's this space or that space or any space, what you're looking at is form artifacts. It's a form artifact of the creation. And so this is our problem. We're just looking at the product of this when the forces come together. And oh, is it a flash? Is it a glow? Or is it the glitter of gold? And or is it just profitable? Is that the only thing we account for? And of course, when we account for something, we're also discounting for something else. So on what basis is our decision based on a blasting where we drop it and run? Or is it based on the bountifulness? Or perhaps it's a genetic defect? And it's not to ask too many questions, it's to understand when we look at our adaptation to our environment, the earth is our primary concern. And so everything that we're looking at in terms of physicality is an earthbound adaptation. But this earthbound adaptation has a certain characteristic which is very unique, because in the process of physical materialization, it incorporates a delay in consequences. So the delay in consequences is physical. The instantaneous consequences is plasmatic. This is a key point if we understand the differences. And we need to understand the differences because the physical reality is an adaptation of the plasma reality. So what is the plasma field adaptation? And so that becomes the universal dynamic transfer state between the soul of man and the soul of the body. And that's what we're talking about today. This dynamic transfer state, which is transferring dynamically the emotion of position. And so the manifestation of that becomes the adaptation, and it's a multi-level adaptation. And where we see the interaction of the supragranular layer that transfers us from this dynamic transfer state to this physical destination state. And so all of this is a process. And so if we only recognize our physical state, but we do recognize our emotional state, but which emotional state are we talking about? And so we find that there are more than one emotional states. And so we see that one emotional state is the soul of the man state, another emotional state is the soul of the body state, another emotional state, well, there's the GAN state and the nano state. And so we find that really all of these emotional states have a plasmatic dimension, and they manifest themselves into this physical dimension, but not only of man space, but also of earth space. And so we see that there's a relationship, and this pattern repeats itself throughout the universe, where we have the sister universe and man's universe, where the one field is larger than the other. We have the same relationship between the earth and the sun. And so we see that we have the same relationship with the soul of the man and the soul of the body. And that the combination of these three fields, as how they interact, they act as one soul. That would have to be another dimension. So if we go back and review, and of course, so we see that from a soul standpoint, we have the soul of the man and the soul of the body, and then we have a physical body. And so our understanding comes where a similar comparison is the brain, the heart, and the reproduction system. Okay. So the reproduction system seems to be very much a positive component of the physical system. So we find that this whole home of the soul of the man is in the brain. And the home of the soul of the body is in the heart level. And so the reproduction level is right in that physical area. So it's not only the home of past generations and our generation, but it's also the home of the regenerations. And so there's a connection between all of these levels. Because if there wasn't a connection, when we regenerate, we'd be, well, in simple math, we'd be missing 2/3 of our body. So do we reproduce only the reproduction level? And so we see that there's a component of all three levels. That's the cellular level. And each cell has a soul. And so this is how the emotion can transcend the various levels. So if this emotion can transcend all of these levels, well, which home is the home of emotion? Or maybe where is the home of the emotion? Because we've only taken into account our souls and our physicality, but we are working on a system of adaptation. And so when the higher level feeds the lower level, as we've seen in the stacker units, that the higher level doesn't necessarily just feed the immediately lower level. It feeds any lower level. That's part of the feeding process, but there's also a feedback process. So if the feedback process is of a higher energy strength, which energy strength is higher than the man space energy strength? And that comes from the environment. And so likewise, the environment doesn't just feed the next immediate level, which is our physical need, right? Because we're on this planet, which is physical, and we're on our bodies, which is physical. So there's immediate physical need. But not only, we have other needs. So we have an emotional need, we have a soul need, and we have a response requirement. Because how do we know how much to feed and when to stop feeding? And so we look at the position within what we call the cup of the universe, which is representative of our brain, and how we have the whole soul of the man seated within the brain in the center spot. And we have the relationship with all the different ganses and how they work. And so we find that the seat, the center of the soul of the man, is this point of gravitational stability. And so everything else is as a result of the magnetical stability. And the reason it's stable is because there's a balance between the magnetical and gravitational field forces, and so we call those magravs. But we have to look at more than just the basic elements, because when we look at the periodic table of elements, the first thing is these are the earth space details. And the second thing is that they're, well, elementary. They're elementary. And we are far from elementary. We're extremely complex. And you have to have this complexity. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this diversity. And so when we're looking at just how the dynamic plasma is transcending the boundaries, we first of all have to find that there's a plasmatic feeding from the inner space. And so there's a radiance that comes from this inner space. And so as we're feeding, then also has to come back. This has to be a feedback radiance to our inner space. And so how this appears to us, regardless whether it's in a plasmatic manifestation or a physical manifestation, affects not only our inner space field, but this inner space point within our field, because this inner space point reflects the soul spectrum. And each of us has our own soul spectrum. So each of us has our own fingerprint. And so that fingerprint is present in all of our cells within our souls. And each cell has a soul. And so the soul cell, or the cell soul, is a transcription of the coding that's come in the RNA and the DNA. And yet, we find that when we start cell production, they start off as being undifferentiated. So the cell production is already independent from the differentiation. So there has to be some way to communicate this differentiation to know the position. Because, you know, we'd have trouble if the nose were on our toes. So the cells differentiate and they keep producing. But what starts the production? But what stops the production? So we find that there has to be some kind of communication. And so we see that there's a communication within the cell, right? Because the cell has a boundary. And so there's an outside of the cell and there's an inside of the cell. So there has to be a communication to go from the outside in, and then likewise, a feedback going from the inside out. And so we see that if there's a disruption of this communication, we call that cancer. But then you can have cell-to-cell communication, what we call intercellular communication. And likewise, if there's a disruption of that communication, well, that is also cancer. And so when you have a group of cells, so a group of cells could be an organelle, or it could be an organ, or a part of the body. And so any part of that where there is a disruption of communication, well, that is a cancer. So if there's a disruption of that communication, and as a result of some kind of force that caused this manifestation, what is to say that this will either be enhanced or diminished? And what is to say that not only would that affect the position within the group, but it may go to another group? What is to say? So if it's in one group, what is to say that it's not in the other group? Well, the same thing that caused the creation of that group. And what was that? That was the psychosomatic communication. What is that? So you find that the RNA modification comes from the sharing of the adaptation of the universal energies. And you were born with that because that's part of your inner space spectrum. And so we see the DNA modification is a sharing adaptation of the earth space energies. You have to adapt to your environment. That's your feedback radius. And so when we look at what we are, then we see that what we are is not the reflection, it's the emission. You emit what you are, you reflect what you are not. So if you say that you're blue jeans, you're not blue jeans, you're every other color except blue jeans. Unfortunately, in today's society, you're not green jeans either. So we had this confusion, this adaptation confusion. And we get into the gene modification and we see that that's a disruption or an alteration. But is it enduring or is it reversible? It all depends on your point of view. So if you're viewing our point of view from this physical earth body, maybe what we need to understand is that whether it's our earth body, which is part of the earth space, and the earth space also has an inner space, and you find that man space has this inner space. And so where's this outer space? And so what is the difference? The difference, of course, we said, when you look at the earth space, it has concentric circles, where we have the rarefied magnetical pea stone, and we have the dense soul of the earth in the core. And we're in between there, in that biosphere range. And so now we understand that the plasmatic hemispheric rotation, which is rotating in the opposite direction. So what we're talking about is the North Pole, Northern Hemisphere rotating in one direction, opposite to the Southern Hemisphere rotating. But the Earth space rotates in one direction because the Earth space is a physical manifestation of the two plasma fields. 1 and 1 is more than 2. Well, one hemisphere and one hemisphere is one Earth, right? But not only, because we have the vertical people, we have the horizontal people, and then we have the man space people too. And so all of this is reflected in the gravitational stability of this planet. And so we see that there are components, and each of them has to have a gravitational stability, and at the core is the soul. And so there's a soul and the soul of the body. And that becomes the representation of the physical body. And so we had a dilemma trying to differentiate between the physicality and the plasma reality. And we've seen that, you know, the earth rotates, but doesn't walk, but it does rotate around the sun also. So it does move. So it moves without walking is what the point is. And man moves by walking, but doesn't rotate. So which way does anything rotate? Because there's no determination there of the direction of the rotation, no determination there of the speed of the rotation. And when we look at all the other spaces in our universe, and the most important space, of course, is our sun space, right? Because we're on this planet space called Earth, but this Earth is not the only planet. And then we have this moon space, which is part of Earth space, but it has its own space. And then there are all these spaces in between. And so, you know, which is the landing point, which is the launching point, and wherever you're going, none of these are outer space. They're all some space. And so it's to understand these relationships. It's to understand this magnetical gravitational balance, what we call a maggrav, where we have the scientific community, and they understand the physical science, or so they think. And then we have the spiritual community, and they understand the spiritual science, or so they think. And then we find there's the plasma science, which not only explains the other two sciences, but adds to the knowledge. And because this is what affects the rate of change. And so we're part of that group of knowledge seekers who is aware of the plasma science. But do we understand these relationships? And so we always say it becomes our point of view. But our point of view seems to come to this vanishing emotion point. How do we rationalize between the plasmatic reality and the physical reality? And then so we find that our physical reality is mired in between at least two plasmatic realities, but not only. And so when we look at the combination of the transmission, the transition, and then our point of existence, which is the transmutation, we find that our point of existence is a confirmation via this connection. And so this connection is the connection point between all the dimensions. And as usual, we didn't say which dimension. What we are saying is that there's a relationship. And so if we look at the fundamental principles of the twinity, which is the dynamic plasma field of the electron and the dynamic plasma field of the proton, and how the larger proton feeds the smaller electron, and yet the two maintain a balance. So clearly there's something missing. We have this atom marriage, and all that is a form artifact. And so when we look at the soul of the earth and the soul of the earth body, and then the manifestation of the physical earth body, then we understand that there are different plasmatic concerns with respect to our environment, which includes the peace dome, the biosphere dome, and the core of the earth. And so that's just a learning point where we have the soul of the earth body as part of our peace dome. And then we have the biosphere, which includes the atmosphere and the water and the land. And then, of course, it also includes the vertical and horizontal people, and of course, the people, us. And then there's the soul of the earth in the core. So you need all these three fields to create this dimension. And now that gives us the gravitational stability. And now we understand how the coming of all these fields together is resolved. And so when we look at our physical body, we too are amalgamation of various fields of cells. And each cell has a magnetical gravitational field, and each cell has a soul, and the amalgamation of all of these cells has a magnetical gravitational relationship and a soul. And so that's where there's a fundamental ability to compare. And then when you look at this fundamental model of nuclear decay of the neutron, and then you see that, well, one neutron can create this electron-proton marriage, but there's a release of energy, which we call the ray. And so that's how that's launched. And then you see that this is an ongoing process because energy is always in motion. And so once we have this structure of this ongoing motion, ongoing transfer of energy in motion, and then we see that we have another plasma dimension. And so these are all the reference points that we have to look at, because the result really is the ray emission and the ray absorption and the transfer of energy from one field to another. And this is all done at light speed. But which speed of light? Well, we didn't say. And we know that we can go faster than the physical light. And how do we know that? Well, because there's a plasmatic spectrum, there's a physical spectrum, and we know that the physical spectrum is something that we can see. And so therefore it's a manifestation of the energy transfer of light, physical light. But there's another plasmatic dimension. And then there's another connecting dimension. We can't even see that. And that is the reality dimension. Well, what is that? And so we find that that's the here to the there, where the plasma feeding rule says the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. Okay, so now we have a direction of flow, and we understand that there are principles in the magnetical field strengths and the magnetical forces of attraction and repulsion, which we call magnetical and gravitational field forces. And we can say that the magnetical is feeding and the gravitational is the feedback. And so there has to be some kind of stability. And so the direction of flow indicates the charge. But there has to be a balance. It's a two-way street. And so the gravitational stability is within the core, and the magnetical extremities are the balance, and the whole balance is a maggrav. And so to maintain this balance without stopping the energy, which we can't stop the energy, we put it in a field of rotation. And then it becomes a matter of relationship. The relationship between the here and the there. And then the adaptation between the here and the there. And all of this adaptation affects what we emit and what we absorb. So what we absorbed initially was this principal matter which brought us here with the culmination of the matter state, the matter-gen convergence, which included the principal matter and the transition matter. But this converged in a field environment, which we call Earth space. And so the plasma-gen convergence of our man space interacting with the plasma-gen convergence of the Earth space created another field, which we call the inertia. And that created a balance. And so we see that there's a biosphere emotional affinity, an emotional affinity with water, with GANs, and with the plasma. It all has to do with some kind of emotional connection. And so something is always something as opposed to something else. So we can see that there's a glass bottle, but we can see right through it. And then we can see the GANs inside the bottle, and we can see the water inside the bottle, and we can look right through it. And in fact, there's a hole inside the GANs, so we're looking through that as well. So, you know, has it disappeared, or is it just transparent? And where's that energy coming from? And so this is the point in how we make the cups of life. And so all we're trying to do is to contribute to not only the understanding, but the way to explain the understanding is to understand that there is an inner space and there's an emotional strength. And that its emotional strength is derived from an interaction. And so we see when we put the elements within the cup of life, that we were able to create a condition which drew in not an atomic elemental structure, but a molecular structure, meaning more than one, meaning combination. So it's CO2 GANs, calcium carbonate GANs, copper GANs, zinc GANs, amino acid GANs, and H2O GANs. And so we see that 1 and 1 is more than 2 because we still have the original elements. But how much more than 2? And so the most complex of these organisms here is the amino acid GANs, where 1 and 1 is more than 4. And so when we look at the body and we say, well, we have a magnetical field and a gravitational field, and we have a soul, and that structure takes 3 components: the emotion, the physicality, and the soul. Is it only 3 components? We have to take into account also the cup of inertia. Where did that come from? Well, that comes from the interaction with the cup of the earth. So now we have to take more into account. So now we have 5 cups of life. And then when we put all that together, well, that 5, 1 and 1, plus 3 more, it's already 5. It's more than 2, isn't it? And so this is how the energy binding manifests. Energy is absorbed, and then more energy is absorbed. But before that energy can be absorbed, it has to be emitted. Because if you don't emit that energy, then this is going to grow. Well, growing is not a bad thing. It's not a matter of good or bad, it's a matter of stability. And so that's the difference between the Earth and Jupiter, isn't it? But the thing about it is the Earth is quite stable. And then when you look at the sun, well, the sun is really stable. And so is the sun emitting energy? Yeah, you betcha. And is it absorbing energy? Did you ever ask that question? And what about the energy that we get that just passes right on through? So at least we have enough energy to create this balanced field we call Bagraph. But we are short of some energies, which requires a kind of feeding dimension, what we call a supplementation. And that supplementation involves the taking of energy from vertical people and horizontal people. And then we find a massive perversion where we steal from others. And so this affects all of our relationships, doesn't it? Because there's a transmission of energy, and that energy is representative of who we are. And so it's not what we reflect, it's what we emit. Who we are is what we emit, and we emit it everywhere. And the sun is doing the same thing. So if we understand the dynamic plasma relationship of the sun, so any point within the sun space field is a target point. Well, which point is that? It's all of the points. The broadcast is universal, but the reception is specific. And then is there a feedback? And so this is the relationship. And so we see that, you know, as a result of our relationship with our Earth space, there's an environmental modification. And not only that, but we're undergoing an environmental modification, our own man space. And so really the question becomes, is this predictable, or is it a violation of the space? So as we say, a violation of man space. And is it an emotional violation? Or is it a competition between man space and subspace? Or is it a competition between the inner space and the physical space? Or is it a competition with the some space, inner space, who knows which space, versus some space, physical space, who knows which physical space? Or is it a competition between earth space and outer space? And if outer space is not a place, then that's something wrong there. So we find that our space can transmute to some other space. This is all part of emotional positioning. That's the missing link, isn't it? Because there's an interaction, a principal interaction between fields, and let's say the sun and the earth. But we have to understand that that interaction is actually a representation of energy in motion, and as such is also a two-way street. So although the sun is providing energy for the earth, we have to understand that that street, that two-way street, is the path to equality, because it's unconditional. And so if we understand the feeding radiance and the feedback radiance, and we understand that the emotional positioning is as a result of the difference in these field strengths and the communication, then we understand how things are positioned, because we have to accommodate. But we don't accommodate from our physicality, because our physicality is a manifestation. And so to understand manifestation, you say, well, two fields come together. Well, any two fields coming together is a manifestation. So the coming together of these fields is a plasma feeding, and that's what leads to the manifestation. But the manifestation could be non-tangible or tangible, non-visible or visible. And so we not only see the physicality, but we see the emotion of presence, because it's through the emotion of presence that we have the physicality. So by extension, the emotion of presence is also a form artifact. And since we're talking about manifestation of fields, whether it be a launch field or a target field or some field in between, this is all representative of energy in motion. So which dimension are we talking about? So yeah, there is a physical dimension and there is a plasmatic dimension. But from your point of view, the question then comes, is which matter state is the dominant one for you? Because when we're looking for outer space, we're trying to figure out what to do with our physicality. So this physicality manifestation is materialization. And so if we want to move somewhere, we call that dematerialization. This is a specific kind of manifestation. And so the determinant of our physical manifestation really is the soul of man, because that's the essential you. And so what you as a soul, you're interacting between the plasmagen state of the universe and the mattergen state of your immediate environment. And the soul of the body, well, that's a surrogate you, because that's an interacting between the soul of the universe and the physical environment. Which scheme and what size of scheme are you giving your time and attention to? And so this becomes the point of the discussion, because now we're trying to figure out how we do this transmutation, because clearly there's an effect. We at least know that there's a materialization. That we know for sure, right? We have visual proof. But when you have non-visual evidence, then you have to understand that there's different kind of proof. We have the cells. We have the soul of the cells. And the soul of the cells, well, it transcends all the levels. So where is this home of the emotion? Is it in the brain level? Is it in the heart level? We know that the heart level has an emotion, but we're having a reproduction level too. Well, with all these possibilities of places for a soul to keep its emotion, and which soul are we talking about? The soul of the man or the soul of the body? But what about the physical body? And what about all the cells? And, where exactly is this emotional stability? And so we find that actually the stability for man is in this crossover, the crossover of the brain. We have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere of the brain. And we see the same reaction in the universal cup. And there's a crossover at the base of the brain as it comes into the physical body, where the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. And the right brain controls the left side of the body. And so there's a crossover. And so we see that we have a bicameral mind. That's two rooms in the brain, the left side and the right side. And then we see that we have two lungs. And we have organs that are in pairs. Let's say, for instance, two kidneys, two ovaries, two testicles. Or we see that we have organ pair relationships, such as the heart and the liver. But then we have this central thing. And the question really becomes, which side controls the penis or the vagina? And so we know that that's a representation of the emotions of presence. But, which side of the brain controls that? Or is there another emotion? Is the home of emotion between the male and the female, which is in another dimension? And if it's in another dimension, then it's a different kind of emotion, isn't it? And so now this exposes the emotion of position. So that means there's a male emotion. And all men, take that male emotion to represent the physical gut context. But the female emotion, well, that's the intuitive context. Wait a second, there's a marriage emotion. So these things have to balance out. And it's a two-way street, isn't it? But, there's this male brain And so, you know, the male is the dominant one. Well, in some cases, he's the pusillanimous one. And then, of course, she's the submissive one. And in some cases, she's the dominatrix. But then there's the marriage brain, where the thought goes to the family context. And so therefore that demands a partnership, doesn't it? You would think, because it's a brain. But do you only think with your brain? Look at the male heart, the brave heart. Look at the female, the faint heart. But look at the marriage heart. That's the family heart. And then as family, you say, oh, well, as family, blood is thicker than water, isn't it? Yeah, you could get away with that. We're going to discuss that another time. Then, of course, there's the body, the male body, strong and competitive. Yaman. And there's the female body, weak and jealous. But then there's the marriage body. There's daddy and there's mommy. A marriage is a balanced field, isn't it? Well, there's the male pants, isn't it? The courageous pants. Well, there's the female pants too, the courageous dress. Then there's the marriage pants, isn't it? It's a contest. Are we having a competition or are we having cooperation? And as this is a family show, this is the best way that I can describe it. And so what is family? Family is familiarity, isn't it? And familiarity breeds contempt, doesn't it? So we find sometimes that our family is the worst. And you say, well, I respect the family. It depends on the context, doesn't it? And then you find that if the marriage is not working, then there's a family breakup. And what are the contributing factors to this breakup? And so we all long to be part of the family, but if that family is broken up, then sometimes we seek another family. And it could be the gang family, right? Isn't that what they say? We're your family now. But there's a global family, you see. Because the point being that anybody who is in your family and who is sick, the whole family is sick. And so that affects your position. And that affects your emotion. And so your position and emotion are intimately entangled. That entanglement may be a point of conflict. But if you look at it from a point of singularity, then there's the man-made law and there's the universal law. And so the man-made law is physical bound and the universal law is plasma bound. How do you rationalize those two? The universal law affects the emotion of position. The man-made law is a reflection of the emotion of position. And so this is where this point of conflict or tug of war comes between the physical and emotional positioning. So if you're looking at it from the point of view of the soul, that's the feeder. And if you're looking at it the point of view of the physicality, well, that's the feedback. And that affects the emotion of position. And so the emotion of position of physicality doesn't take enough into account. Maybe it only looks at the differences. And it's not just male or female, but there are a lot of other factors. But if we can elevate the souls, then we can amalgamate the emotion of position to eliminate this conflict and build this peace dome. Because the whole peace dome is the giving and taking of energy. But where does that come from? Where do you give to and where do you take from? And you say, well, there are leaders and there are followers. Yeah. Well, who does the leader follow? So a better question is, what is the source of your inspiration? And so we see that the source of the inspiration is at the core of the earth, for the earth. And the peace stone is the magnetical relationship for the earth. So what is the peace stone for us? So the peace stone for us is our positioning with respect to the peace stone of the earth, the soul of the earth body. So the emotional positioning of the soul of the body and the soul of the earth body is the connection to the peace stone through the emotion of positioning. And we know it works. Look at the biosphere of peace that we have with the vertical people. They're all over the place, but each one's in its own place. And that place is that place, and there's another place, and that's another place, and you know, there's a tree space, and there's a grass space, there's another plant space, and many plant spaces, and you see that. So each one has an emotion of positioning, and that relationship is with the earth, because the earth has an emotion also. So what we can see is that the majority are answering the call of freedom and emancipation. You see, because the universe is emotionally normal, emotionally stable. The earth seeks freedom and emancipation. What from? From man? Well, not really. From man's delinquency. Because man is adapting from the wrong point. He's thinking with the wrong head. And our existential adaptation needs to default to the harvest of the plasma emotional energy of the plasma universe, because that's where the emotion of position comes from. And so this is why we're having, in our pursuit of happiness, we're having this launch field failure. It's actually an emotion of position failure, because man has never launched a rocket into outer space. All the souls born on this planet preferred the bountifulness of Earth space, as opposed not only to Mars space, but any other space. Who cares what space? Because here's the map. Here's the emotion of position map. There's a relationship between the magnetical and gravitational field forces. So not only within, but without. In other words, from field to field. And so the difference between the feeding radiance and the feedback radiance is this reality dimension. And it goes through many different dimensions. Which dimension do you want to go to? Because every dimension that you go to is 3 dimensions, and you're not one of those 3 dimensions. So when you go, you're going to another set of 3 dimensions, aren't you? So that's what it is. So it's a 4th dimension, but a 4th dimension relative to 3 other dimensions. But we never said which dimensions. What we did say is that, hey, we wanted to come to Earth space. That was our preference. And we had a sentimentality for Earth as opposed to Mars. Okay, so this is cool. And we know that we were born using this outer space system. But we were born into the inner space of Earth space. And we used our inner space to get there. And so we manifested on this Earth space into Earth. And we landed here as people. This is just one place in our trip. So it's not just the beginning of the trip, but it's partway through our trip. And is it a round trip, or how many places can we go? And that's a really good question, because until we cross that bridge of peace, we're never going to get anywhere. We have to establish our peaceful emotion of position. Because the only way that we can move is by understanding what we are and what we are not. And what we are not is the result of the manifestation. We are the emission of who we are. And we are the absorption, not only of who we are, but also what we need to continue to be who we are. And so this is where the science, the soul again, because the purpose is for peace. It has to be, because that's the way the universe works. And so as we build, 1 + 1 is more than 2. And is it 9, or is it more than that? You know, who puts the limit on that? And so here we are in the post-December 16th era, post-December 16th of the year 2022, where we can now make some choices and understand how we can go through this transmutation space from this bountiful space. And can we do this gracefully? This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, teachings on plasma science. We're calling all Earth space patriots. There's a world peace treaty. Sign it. Sign it with a pen, sign it with your soul, sign it with your heart. Establish your position, because space has overlapping fields of life with freedom from boundaries or abuse. When you look at the emotion of position map, that is the map of the universal community. There's an earthbound physical and emotional gravitational transformation going on, which will help us with the transmutation that connects us from the transparency point and the manifestation point, and allows us to adapt and become aware of the inner space emotional construct, and connects equally to the universal broadcast of the inner space of freedom. And so we see at this point in time, the emotion of position has to adapt with man's morality. Or we could say that man's morality needs to adapt to the emotion of position. Either way, plasma science needs to continue to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the outer space age. That's the end of the lesson, and I really hope you enjoyed this trip. Thank you so much for participating.
Well, now it's their time to participate, our time to participate. Thank you, Alex. You touched on many, many beautiful points today. So I'd like to open it up. Well, first of all, we want to ask if anyone's here for the first time. I thought I saw a couple of names. Wolf. I think you've been in many other meetings. I don't know if you've been in this one before. Would you tell us where you're from and how, what made you join this meeting today? Or am I not correct? If you can come to your phone, your mic, and if you feel comfortable opening it. If not, that's fine. Okay. Anyone else here for the first time? We usually just ask you to open the mic and tell us where you're from, how you found the meeting, and hear your beautiful voice or the sounds you're making. So let's open this up to everyone. I mean, it's a roundtable discussion, so you're free to open your mics. I've done a bit of talking today, so I'd rather defer to the others and hear if they have any questions. I do have a couple of questions, but I'd rather hear from the others if that's possible. And we're not going to laugh. We're going to learn from you. You can also write your question in the chat if you don't feel comfortable opening your mic. But you're among friends, as Mr. Kesh said, the lady who has found much more enjoyment. Actually, I said this to someone yesterday. They said, how come I don't come around more? And I said, well, because I'm interested in, and they know, they've always asked about Mr. Kesh and things. And I said, well, we can't talk about the things I like to talk about. And one of them said he'd be willing to start learning about the technology. I asked him to join this meeting, but I don't see him here. So it sounds like there's a lot of stealing going on around here, right, Alex? But in reality, the one we steal from the most is our own soul, according to Mr. Kesh. But we also steal from the others as well. But I think if you're stealing from your own soul, you probably can't stop stealing from the others until you get into that position. And again, our closest friend we're stealing from, according to what we've learned in this technology. But when we go into space, and he doesn't want us to be fooled by any magicians we meet, is there some sort of form of stealing going on in space, or is it that you would just comply and maybe give up some of your fields to become part of this magician's outfit? Something along that line. How would we be I remember Mr. Kesh saying in this workshop that they didn't want another prophet. So this is in relation to Naomi. This is why he allowed Giovanni to follow his instructions and do the work, because he said, we don't want to have another prophet here. And so perhaps rebuilding the brain, which has never been done before, would have put Mr. Kesh in a way in a different light if it was shared, in a much larger way. So by putting Giovanni and allowing him, Giovanni to do it, I think it diverted some of the attention away from Mr. Kesh, because he said, we don't need another prophet here. He mentioned that in regards to Linz too. Would it be some sort of center about creating everything and so on and so forth? And I don't think he wants it to turn into a Mecca or any sort of thing like that. But when we go into space, apparently we can be fooled. And this is why he says, I don't want you to meet any magicians and be fooled by them. But they may attempt it. Alex, any thoughts on this? I thought it was a
Yeah.
rather safe place in space, but maybe not so.
So, based on what we talked about last week, you mentioned space, and space is a generic term, just like a car. So, if you say you're driving a car, I cannot envision what you're driving. Okay, because I remember in the cartoons that Fred Flintstone had a car, and I don't think that's the kind of car that you're driving. So we need to be a little bit more specific, and that's why this is, gone on this path to identify the different spaces, so that we know exactly which space that we're talking about. So the important thing, the important revelation, as far as I'm concerned, is that wherever you go, the laws that created the manifestation of the periodic table of elements is the same. So in other words, hydrogen on Earth would be the same as hydrogen on Mars. But, we have over 100 elements in our periodic table of elements that we know, but that doesn't include all the elements. And, how many is all of the elements? It's like asking what is the highest number. And so I don't care what number you give, there'll always be a higher number. So what it has to do is with field strength and positioning. And so if we look at the basic cups of life, we see that there are 4 components. And when we look at the universal spaceships, space enhancement units, they have over 400 elements. So you can understand the different interaction possibilities and also the varieties. But what you can't do is go and interact with all of the possibilities. Otherwise, you never go anywhere. So really, the thing that we have to understand. So when we're talking about the space, what differentiates, say, Jupiter space from Earth space? And so there are characteristics. And one question that we could ask: would all the elements from the periodic table of elements of Earth be on Jupiter? Or if they were on Jupiter, would they be of the same field strength? So in other words, for instance, in our environment, we need about 20% oxygen, just saying, for instance. And it's a key component of our survival here. So if we were to go to another planet, would it have oxygen? Or would it have below the threshold amount that we need to survive in our current condition, in our current manifestation? And so by being able to interact with the soul of the Jupiter space, then we could have a determination as to what's required. And so the first thing we have to understand is our position. And so our position is going to be through a form of attraction. Because if you don't want to go there, you're just not going to go there. So that doesn't matter. But let's say you want to go there, so that's an emotional condition. And so if you want to go there, then you want to go there safely. And that is the condition. But if you go there with the idea to be a ruler or a superior being, the first thing is the universal community will look at your inner space, because that's how they function. And so they will tell the true intent right off the bat. And so it's not a poker game. You don't go there and try and bluff your way. You cannot fake sincerity. But they don't fight. They just leave you alone. And so you could end up in as space, let's say Jupiter space, or an in-between space, because you're not going to arrive at Jupiter space. You're going to be kind of maybe orbiting around Jupiter and never being able to land, and you'll find it's a very lonely experience. But you may run across other, shall we say, beings, and who may be in the same predicament. And the chances of that happening are actually quite high, as we know from our history. And so this is never been considered before, because what has changed on December the 16th is the arrival of visitors from these other spaces, whichever spaces they were. And we're saying, well, where have you been? Why haven't you been able to come here? You know, it's fine to say, well, okay, if you're the, superior being, you prove to me that you're the superior being because I want to see you land on the White House lawn. Well, who are you to demand proof? If you're the inferior one and you treat me as the superior one, then who are you to demand me to prove anything to you? I'm just going to leave you alone and you prove it to yourself. Because that's really the nature of stealing. And when you are used to stealing, you can't even tell the difference when you're stealing from yourself or when you're stealing from someone else. So how do you even know the difference? And so you have to look at how the universal community is operating. And if you see that the universal community is operating with an ethos of giving, unconditional giving, through an energy field known as love, if you're not getting that energy field from whomever you encounter, you know, bang, right off the bat, that you're dealing with somebody who is harvesting. They're harvesting. You have to ask yourself, what are we harvesting? And so this becomes the dilemma. When you look at our humanity and what we are doing here or wherever, regardless of the state of the technology, if we're in the business of harvesting, then not only when we go somewhere are we looking for fresh meat, but we ourselves become the target as fresh meat. And this is the danger. And so the only way that you can operate in safety is to elevate to a higher energy state where this type of conduct is not allowed. And the reason it's not allowed is because that's how the universe has been created. So when we look at our universal community and we see that our position is that tiny little red dot, a little pimple on a pimple on a pimple on a pimple, and we say, well, that's our little tiny perfect universe, isn't it? Well, it's not very perfect, but it sure is tiny. And so, that's the reason why. But it's not just within our domain, which is Earth space, but clearly, as we've seen from our history, that there have been others who have had a little bit higher technologies, but they haven't had the higher morality. So there's that kind of fuzzy area where you can increase your technology and still be delinquent in your ideology. And so we need to transcend that. And so we don't need to just elevate to their level. We need to actually jump over that level to go to a level at which point is a ceiling for them. They have a ceiling, and they will not go through that ceiling, not only because of a so-called lack of knowledge, but a so-called lack of desire. They have no emotional desire to transcend that level, because as soon as they go there, they will have a deficiency on the loosh harvesting side. But not only, they will have a reckoning and a judgment, but not from any of us, because you can only have a judgment and reckoning from yourself, because there are no judges in outer space or churches or banks or grocery stores or bowling alleys. So
Right.
this is the difference, and it just becomes a skill. And I think all of us have shared in that skill. When you come to a place and you want to assess the mood of the people there, and you find that, well, I like you and I want to interact with you, and I don't like that person over there, and I'm going to avoid them. And you say, well, wait a second, we're all at this party together. How come you're socializing with some and not from others? Ah, it's just this feeling I get. Oh, really? Do you think this feeling is a manifestation of your emotion of presence? And is it affecting your emotion of position? So yeah, you have the skill, and so we kind of defer this to women. Oh, they have this, feminine intuition. Well, there's a masculine intuition as well. It's just that we suppress it because, well, that would be just using energy from a higher state, and that wouldn't be very masculine, would it? So, this is all what leads to the confusion. So let's eliminate the confusion and understand that the strength of the family comes from the strength of the individuals. That's the inner space strength. Okay,
Yes.
back to you, Mark.
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to finishing school when we talks about dining with the creator, the etiquette of space, perhaps. Again, we tell children don't take candy from a stranger. And maybe it could be similar in space, but I think or maybe it's not finishing school, or we'll call it semi-finishing school. As we start to learn how to feed ourselves, give and take, I would think that was automatic, but if there's no energies there, we're going to have an alternative. As he said, you'll be able to tap into this area, or maybe back to your tabletop unit, which reverts back to Lintz about feeding, what to take, how to take it. Okay, I was just kicked out for a moment, or was that what happened there? It had to reconnect. And that
I guess you were changing your positioning.
Something happened there. Alex, do you want to share the screen again? Did the host change at all? That was one of the first times in a long time that's happened. Usually, there you go. We see your screen should be coming up. Sorry about that. We were just talking about dining etiquette and feeding and all the different understandings we may need. If the energy is not there, we'll have to source it or understand a little bit more. But I think that's what these upcoming, because he said we have to teach you how to feed yourselves. We have to teach you how to travel. So I think
Mark,
this is part of the etiquette of interacting in space, like a finishing school in a way.
Yeah, certainly. So we started this whole series with terminology. And so one of the victims of terminology, of course, is feeding. And what does it mean? So, automatically we think of lifting our hand to our mouth and carrying something along with it. Piece of cheese, chicken bone, whatever.
Okay, has put something into the chat. Can anyone tell What is the similarity between 129 Tesla, October 2014, and December 16th, December 2022? What is the similarity between 129 Tesla and the 16th of December, where we saw the end of the movie first, which is connecting to your creator? Anyone?
I'd like to address that.
Yes, please. Hopefully, Odd opens his mic and you can have a conversation about this.
Sure, I hope someone can tell me what they see in the similarity.
So thank you for your question. In the 129 was a demonstration of the power of the plasma field and how it can transcend the various field strengths. And it did that phenomenally. 129 was an extremely high number. I don't believe it has been replicated since by anybody else, but I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. What does matter is that there was a proof of concept. So we had that proof of concept back then, and the difference between then and now is that now we have developed a practical application of that proof of concept. The concept itself has not changed, and the method has not changed. It's just the design has changed and the application has changed. So we have sort of, come to the end of the road when we did the 129 and say, oh, well, that was pretty amazing. And now what? Well, it's taken us all that time for now what? Because what we have been doing is trying to be graceful in allowing people to adapt and incorporate that in the new society and to bring peace and prosperity to this planet. And there has been a universal failure. So the first answer to your question is the difference between that and what we did on December the 16th is no difference at all. The second thing is the understanding of the taking things into account and how many fields do you take into account and the combinations thereof. And so when we're looking at, say, a universal enhancement unit and as with the capability of flying and thinking of that as our own personal sports car. But if we look at the capability of all of us who were born, none of us came here with a sports car, and certainly none of us came here with a rocket. And so all of us came here, and I mean all of us came here. So therefore, scale is what's changed. And so that is a newer technology that came as a result of Tesla 129. So what we're looking at is the next stage in development. And I don't know how many stages of development were in that process, but what we do know is those who are party to that stage of development have not been able to advance. And the reason for it is because they've been looking at the result and not the cause, not the, shall we say, the emotional aspect that originated from that in the first place. You see, the emotional energy is of a higher order of magnitude than the physical energy and is part of the manifestation process. But like the speed of light, we didn't say which emotion either. And so there are different emotions. So generically, just like when we say space, we don't know which space. So when we say emotion, we don't know which emotion either. It's a generic thing. So now we see the emotional position, and this emotional position is what says, well, I want to be here as opposed to being there. And what is that criteria? And how do you determine that? And so you could say, well, I want to be with that person because I have this sexual urge. Or you could say, well, I want to be with that person because that person would be a beautiful partner to be with. And so that becomes the criteria that guides you. And, you know, you are the individual and you get to choose. So we find, like on December the 16th, many who went on that excursion had their own experience, right? They achieved what they could achieve within their own sphere of influence, within their own understanding, but more importantly, within their own openness to the change. Because I can attest personally, it's a traumatic change. It is a very dramatic change, and the consequences can be very harsh. And so this is one of the concerns that we have, this rate of change. How sudden can it be? And what would be the feedback from that sudden change? So we are in a position right now where the three most important factors are now coming into play. When I say the three most important factors, it's an arbitrary choice on my part, and we say transportation, energy, and feeding. And if we don't have to worry about transportation, energy, or feeding, what is that going to do to our physical existence on this planet? And so the answer is it's going to be a traumatic change. And how traumatic is it going to be for certain individuals? But does it have to be traumatic? Well, the thing is, failing to do anything about this situation is already having ramifications, and they definitely are traumatic. So we are at the point here where we continue to have people dying from nefarious means, women put into the sex trade, children being sacrificed, and all the other terrible things that are happening. And it's needless, and it's a violation of universal law. So it's happening, and it has nothing to do with us in terms of causing that problem. We are part of the solution, not part of the problem. And so what we need to do is to shift the blame to those who are not solving the problem and carry on with the solution and not dwell on, you know, who did this and who did that. We need to look at what are we doing to make this universe a better place. And we can do this on a plasmatic basis, and each and every one of us has this power. But it's to understand how to manifest this power in a graceful way. And that's one of the reasons that the foundation is as strong as it is, because it's appealing to the core sentimentality of the human existence, and that goes right to the soul. So it's a great question, and thank you so much.
Ed, did you have a follow-up, or would you like to share your understanding with us, please?
Yes,
Thank you.
in the first place, thanks, Alex, for showing the people the difference between what I ask and what you answer. I ask about the similarity. You talk about the difference. And the only thing that I heard from you that is similar to it, it's the soul. And also, Mr. Cashew said, what happened in Linz happened before, like the 129, but it happened more times than just these two events. And it is registered all around the earth. And Mr. Cashew is knowing what has been registered, I don't know, geregistreerd is on the earth because of the similar neutrinos that are in existence at that time. And if you can pinpoint the, how do you say that? Oh, difficult to, not the frequency, but the wave control. You are at the level of the soul. That is what happened with the 129.
Were
And
you
so
in that?
it's the same.
Were you in that meeting, Ad? Were you part of that? I thought you had some connection to this 129, or maybe I'm thinking of someone else.
No, you're right. Sorry. I know what happened at that time. And I think Erik Clausen knows also what happened. And Mr. Cash also. Really what happened and also afterward. But that's for you to find out. That's why, do you know if anyone can tell the similarity between these two events? And that's the only similarity in these two events is the soul. Just think about it. That's all. I have said enough.
Okay. Very well.
Yes, very well.
You know, we have to learn how to feed. We have to be taught how to feed ourselves. We have to be taught how to travel. And now we have to be also learn how to connect to these not these energy centers, but maybe so, but these knowledge centers in the universe. We don't know how to do that. Could we do that from here, Alex? Would you say, while we're in the matter state, or does that only apply when you're in the energy state?
No, it definitely can be done from this state, and this is the revelation, you see, because we've always had the notion of this inferiority because that's what we were told. But that there is no inferiority and there is no superiority. What there is an advancement, and I have come to believe now that our manifestation into physicality is an advanced characteristic.
An advanced characteristic?
Yes, a technologically advanced characteristic. But it comes with some different parameters and some deficiencies, in which case it was specifically referred to as a shortage of about 20% on the feeding of energies, which is contributing to the duration of the life and also the existence and the aging and all that other good stuff that goes along with it. So we become accustomed to that because that's all we know. The question becomes, if we know more, would that all change? And you can't know everything. It's like going into the library and saying, you know, until I read every book in the library here, I won't have enough knowledge. But you have to know who the author is, and, you know, is that information real? And, you know, and so you could spend a whole lifetime reading all the books in the library and you guarantee you won't succeed. So you have to be discerning and you have to learn by connection. And so all of us now have access to this technology to learn by connection without knowing. It's through the connection we will achieve the knowing. And that knowing is within us. But you cannot, shall we say, exercise that knowing if you don't have that trust. So if our trust is only limited to what we can touch and what we can feel, then, that's a self-limiting thing. So we need to open up our terms of reference. And so we need to see that there's more that meets the eye than what we think meets the eye. So specifically in referencing Tesla 129, and now I see that ad was there, and so he has additional knowledge that I don't have, but this is what I do know, is that when we looked at the MAGRAV condition, that was the isolated view. But if you look at the expanded view, you see that there were multiple MAGRAVs, and they were all working together. And so you find that if you have one MAGRAV and you want to transcend from one dimension to another dimension, or from one energy state to another energy state, maybe you only make a leap of one order of magnitude. But if you have an interaction of different fields, and each one of them has leapt by an order of magnitude, well, the combination of those may in fact manifest itself, given enough energy absorption, may manifest itself into 4 leaps of orders of magnitude. You see, well, do we stop there? And then if you go beyond that, what happens? What is the next level? And does it have to be at one level? Well, clearly we have come to the point now where we have jumped from the physical state right up to the soul of man state, shall we say, bypassing the soul of the body state. And so is the soul of the body exclusively in its position based on the soul of man? And so the answer is no. Because the soul of man has to interact with the soul of the earth, the soul of the sun, and the soul of the creator, and all the other things.
And now interacting with the tabletop unit. He said, don't look to save energy from them. Look to enlighten your knowledge. And it feeds your soul at the same time. So again, our greed of wanting to save energy, save a few dollars, maybe more, but that's not the real purpose of the head unit and the tabletop unit.
No, but it may be.
Yeah.
It may be part of the graceful transition, though.
Oh, yeah, we're in this transition period now.
Yeah, but the way what I'm saying, yeah, position of transition, sure. The kind of transition, there can be a harsh transition or a graceful transition, or, some point in between. Okay. We're not going to come in at number 11 on the amplifier, in pure distortion. We've got to come in at number 5, maybe, some kind of happy medium.
This is the dining with the creator feature. And we learned some of the finer points. We're not going to take this meeting past midnight. There's about 4 minutes left. I'm going to play Marius's interpretation of the universal body or the flight system. So if, thank you, Alex. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please continue, but we're only going to, so if someone did have a comment or a question they wanted to share or make, please do it in the next few minutes.
Yes, Mark, I just want to make one comment.
Yes.
What is it that makes us equal to the creator?
Because you're created out of the fields of his soul. You are him.
What is the creator doing?
He's everywhere doing everything.
On soul level.
He's everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Not you're thinking physical.
Just my understanding, just the way I'm seeing it at my
position. The creator is giving unconditionally. That's all he asks from you, to become the same. on soul level, not on physical soul level. That's all. If you want to go to the Creator, give unconditionally on the soul level. That's all.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, it is that unconditional giving, like the sun shines on in all directions, pretty much equally, as I understand it.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you to all the participants for allowing me to present today. I hope you enjoyed this session and look forward to another presentation next week. So back to you, Mark. Thank you.
Yes, and hopefully we continue more of these interactions. And thank you, Ed, for coming in and sharing with us. I know sometimes it's not easy, but your English is more than sufficient to make your points and your understanding to convey it. So thank you very much for sharing. Dean?
Mark, hi, thank you. Can I just quickly just put something in there? Maybe Alex might want to comment on it. I don't know.
Okay, we'll go another 5 or 8 minutes. Go right ahead.
Okay. So my I'm going to sort of formulate a question as it comes to me.
For all of us to think about, directed towards Alex. Is
for
this
everybody.
Okay.
For everybody.
Yep.
For everybody.
Okay.
So when we reach Tesla's 1 to 9 and we elevate enough that we create a space gap, we become the energy flow and we touch. So we the physical, the soul of physicality is now surrounded by the soul. The soul is then in communication with the creator and everything. And so when this soul then takes another position with inner thought, do the other beings, other souls present, and we talk about taking energies and giving energies and things, and depending where you go, do they take from the soul, or do they see, because it's a soul reversal, it's a flip, is the soul of physicality that's within now, is the bird that is now trapped. Do they see this energy that they require, or is it the energy from the soul? As a thought.
I would think it would be the energies you're giving off that they're allowed to take. They're not allowed to take directly from your soul. They're taking and exchanging. This is what we have to learn. The plasma gives and takes. He said we have to learn about this, but I don't think it's, again, you change the structure. Gravitational minus magnetical gives you a structure, correct?
And if so, correct. So if you're in that position in the blink of an eye, it's zero time communication. You have unconditionally given, as has just been spoken about. Then you in the blink of an eye, in another thought, you could be in another position. So, and in another dimension. There's no time, there's no space, there's no so you could be at any point. So how does this position take place where an energy could be taken from you if within the moment that this source comes to you, you can be in another place?
Well, Mr. Kesh said we can take from his soul as well. So we can't take all of it, he said, but you can take what you need at any time. So maybe it's just not the energies we're giving off, depending on the strength of that soul, I would imagine. I don't know. Anyone else want to comment? Ed, you've opened your mic.
Yes, I'm not certain I totally understand Dean's question, but one thing I do would like to put forth is that it was my impression that yes, there's a soul of man and the soul of physicality, but I've heard Mr. Kesh say they're one. And I think the two souls energetically combine in a way. It's not like two separate entities.
Well, could we ask Moses, Christ, Muhammad, or Buddha to confirm that?
Are you
You
making
just
light?
did.
No, I'm just saying, I think we have to embed it. This is what he was talking about here. You have to, when you elevate that soul, somehow we need to embed that soul of physicality into the soul. He was talking about that in this workshop, but go ahead, Ed, please.
Well, it already is, isn't it?
Like I said, what would Moses say? What would Christ say?
Why is that? I don't understand what
Their
Christ
soul
and
of
Moses.
physicality has not reached the combining. They haven't. The lion and the lamb is not sleeping together in the same nest. Their soul is perfect, but the soul of physicality hasn't reached the connection point. Apparently, just thinking.
Oh, you're
my
saying
understanding.
they can't be one because there's a difference between them. Well, no, that is correct. I understand what you're saying now, and I don't pretend to understand the totality of it. But
I don't either.
But the soul of physicality, even though it has its faults and stuff, it's not like a ball that's separate from another ball. The two energies are constantly intertwining, even though they both have their own source. They intermingle, and the faults of the physicality affect the soul, but not causing it to have imperfection. But
Right.
the whole does not function as a whole as long as there's that discrepancy between the physicality and the soul.
Alex or Dean?
Well, this is brilliant. This conversation with Ed and Ed, we've got two of the vowels taken care of right now. But the point is that we have to enlarge our scheme. So when we take things into account, we can't just take into account me, myself, and I. We have to take into account not only our neighbors, who are they themselves, and but we have to take into account our environment, and we have to develop our skills as a result of this added knowledge. So we can acquire this added knowledge as soon as we understand, like Ad said, about this unconditional. And this is a very, very important point. Try it on your friends, and you'll see that there's always a condition attached. And don't try it with your family, because they generally, if they don't agree with you, you have to ask yourself, well, what constitutes a family? If I have an awareness and you don't have an awareness, how can you not have an awareness if you're part of my family? So we find that the nature of the family is not what we really think. It's the whole planet is a family, and we're all part of that. And so this is what the leaders have to understand, that they have a responsibility to lead, because the outcome, the shall we say, the benefit to their family is dependent on their actions. And if their family is not prospering and is not peaceful, then that's the mirror, and that mirror is your own self-judgment. And so you understand at that point what your course of action, and whether or not it's appropriate or not. And that is the rationalization between your soul and the physical outcome, which has many, many levels of interaction all the way in there. So now we get to pick and choose which level of interaction we want to work with. And is it enough? Well, I don't know. How big is large? Who decides enough is enough? And when is it enough?
Alex,
not now, when?
Alex,
Yes,
can I just quickly say something to you? So when I was giving this a little workshop yesterday, when I was delivering the knowledge, and you look into the eyes of the souls that are receiving. You see them reach 129. You see the galaxies in their eyes. You look through them and you see the glisten in their eyes. You see the opening up, the expansion of the soul, the knowledge, the filtration, the field strength. In an instant, you see it. You see the glow of them, and you recognize it. And this is the expansion of the soul. And this is just through, not just through, excuse me. This is through speaking it and delivering the message. And you absolutely see it in their physicality. And then as you look into their eyes, you see behind the eyes, you see the soul, and you sense it, and you feel this field strength between yourself and the other soul as you deliver the message when you're in physicality. And I experienced this yesterday, and it was, and I've experienced it many times, and it's a very beautiful thing. Sorry, Alex.
No, it sure is, and you're absolutely correct. And you just cannot lie to yourself. You can pretend, but it's at your expense. That's the kind of the rule there. So wonderful conversation. Thank you all so very much. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share the screen. Yes, both souls are fully aware of each other, but they don't have that close working relationship. They're not working together. They're more working independently, as I understand it. Where the soul of physicality during the day, that's his time. And at night, it's the soul of the man's time. But I think we're trying to get this, to clear up this misunderstanding between the two souls and come into a better working relationship. Okay, just a second. Okay, we're going to play the artist's representation of a physical flight system, but again, you can imagine this as the soul of the man traveling instantaneously. I want to thank everyone for their inputs joining today. To the Catch American Knowledge team, I just thought we'd flash the background in case someone sees this in the future and they were wondering, where is this coming from, or how do we find more about this? And of course, you can go directly to the Keshe Foundation and enjoy all the knowledge that's been shared over a decade or decade and a half or more by Mr. Keshe with all of us. Anyone else? Yes, Ad. Ad, your mic came open.
Sorry, I just I heard about the conversation between Alex and some things. Remember the Alex speech. One beat is just a beat. It's give off some fields. But if you make a connection between them, like the 6 and the 12 beats behind each other, you can create all kinds of fields, and every beat give to the next one or the previous one. So the energy they give away isn't lost. Just remember the little things like the Alex beat. They do the same with the nano coating. It's not lost when
I think we just lost your
wait
voice.
a little time, but it will return back.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all again for bringing the change, and we're all holding a small piece of this very large carpet, as Mr. Keshe often says, and we're bringing the change. And we have a great manager, and he knows the plays and the moves, and we're being taught directly how to operate, how to understand the beauty of our own creation, and tap into the universal a little bit more than we've been doing. And again, it's a process, so it will take time, but we're growing into the knowledge at different speeds, at different understandings, but we're all growing together. So thank you all for being here at the Cash American Knowledge Team, and we'll end the program right after the final disclaimer. Thank you all again. Thank you, Alex, Dean, everyone who's here, whether you've opened your mic or not. You're still a part of the communication that's going on and adding your fields to the meeting. So thank you very much.
Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.